In tonight's video, we'll be reading some of the most disturbing Reddit stories, confessions, encounters, moments where someone realized they were closer to danger than they ever imagined. In this video, we're reading real Reddit threads involving true crime encounters with criminals, stalkers, and people who would later be exposed for horrific acts. These stories are unsettling, emotional, and real. Please listen with care. Let's begin with the first story. So this first story comes from a Reddit thread that asked a simple but unsettling question. Have you ever had a real-life encounter with the mob? People were invited to share strange or dangerous interactions, not crimes, just moments that made them uneasy. So, I'll be reading some of the most disturbing and intense replies from that thread. Here's the first story. My dad owned an airbrush store and a few other stores like a wheel game on the Jersey Shore boardwalk. A lot of shit there was ran by the mob. My dad even told me stories about how he'd go to this VIP area of a bar after hours and would stay up all night doing coke with corrupt cops. He said they were some scary fucking dudes, but my dad got a shit ton of cheap stock for his stores from guys like this. I remember they'd always bring nice steaks and lobster and shit like that too, lol. I guess they were hitting refrigerated meat trucks or something. My pops has passed, so I can talk about this stuff. He used to run drugs from Florida to New York, coke and ecstasy. My dad wasn't a part of the mob, but he was always respectful and wouldn't turn down making some decent money. They all liked my dad. My dad was a hell of an artist and did murals in their restaurants and houses. If you ever went to the Beachcomber restaurant in the 90s, they had a cool mural that my dad painted, and he built this 3D boardwalk out of little bits of wood, and it even had lights and stuff. Really cool piece. If any of you guys remember that, it would be cool to hear from you. At like 6 to 7 years old, I could walk up and down the boardwalk by myself, and nobody would fuck with me. Everyone was keeping an eye on me. I remember one poor guy who was probably on vacation came up to me and thought I was lost. 3 big-ass Italian dudes came up and almost beat his ass until his wife and kids came up, lol. Man, I would constantly get free pizza, snow cones, ice cream, lol. The boardwalk was a really cool, tight-knit community. The Sopranos is such a nostalgia trip because it takes me right back to the late 90s/early 2000s. Like I said, my dad was pretty friendly with a lot of those guys. He said he went out one night with one of the higher-ups' sons, and they wanted to pick up some coke. Dude went into the house, and it was taking forever. So my dad grabbed a baseball bat from the trunk and went in the back door. He said he kind of blacked out, but apparently they were trying to rob the guy, and my dad just went to town with this bat. He said he beat the fuck out of 5 or 6 people and got the dude's son out of there. My dad said he has no clue if he killed any of them or not. So he drives the son to where his dad was. Then 2 big-ass Italian guys grab my dad and throw him in the back of their car. Someone else takes my dad's keys in his car, and they drive my dad to the beach. He thought they were going to kill him, but they grabbed a garden hose, hosed him down, and gave him sweatpants and a sweatshirt that was like 4 sizes too big. They took him back, and his car was spotless, and they sent him on his merry way. I remember that night he came home, only because of the weird sweatpants, shirt, and he was acting super strange. It was like 4 or 5 in the morning too. Anyways, they hooked my dad up with a killer spot during the St. San Gennaro feast in Little Italy, NYC. No rent. My dad made a killing out there and said he handed 2 envelopes of cash to one of the mob guys that helped him get the spot. Y'all don't have to believe any of this. But there were quite a few nights where he would drink himself into oblivion and talk about that night in tears. So I fucking believe him. R.I.P. Pops. This one feels disturbingly real. It's not flashy or exaggerated. It's just someone describing a life that existed right alongside normal family life. Free food, protection, money, and then moments where you realize how dangerous it all actually was. The fact that he was a kid and didn't even understand what was happening until years later makes it even darker. Stories like this remind you that the mob wasn't just crime. It was woven into everyday life for a lot of people. All right, let's move on to the next comment. I have a good story. I live in Norfolk, Virginia. Big Navy town, if you don't know. My wife ran an in-home daycare, infants up to kindergarten age. She had a client that brought their kid. He was like 2. They were a young couple. He was Navy. She was young, around 24. Gorgeous Italian girl from Milwaukee. A few months into their kid being there, she comes to the wife and I, because I help out when I'm not working, and says, "My father is coming to stay with me, and he'll be coming to pick up the kids sometimes, so I'm going to bring him by to introduce him to everyone." "Okay, no problem," the wife says. Then the mom says, "Okay, but I have to tell you, he was in prison and has just gotten out." Of course, our eyes get wide. She says, "Yeah, he was in the mob and he's been in jail for like 8 years. She assures us he's a nice and kind and a great dad, and most importantly, he's leaving his old life behind. "Okay," we say, "bring him by." A few days later, here they come. I swear to God, y'all, Paulie fucking Walnuts walked in my house. He was an Italian man, in his 60s, slicked-backed thinning hair, already has the tan going on, solidly built. He has clearly been in prison and spent time in the gym. He definitely has the vibe of a man who has done things and could hurt you if he wanted to. According to the few things he talked about, he was like an enforcer and a debt collector in Chicago and Milwaukee. I don't dig too deep, because he makes it clear that he is no longer that dude. He is also the nicest, sweetest man you could ever meet. He introduces himself to my wife and I. "Hey, how you doing?" He is charming and funny. He assures us that his time inside has changed him, and he is a grandpa first and foremost. There won't be any problems. Of course, his grandson adores him and is practically attached to him. He introduces himself to all the kids, and they all love him. He is totally cuddly, cool old guy. We have no issues with him. The other parents are told about him. Everything is fine. He comes a few times a week to pick up his grandson. He has lollipops and hugs and what's your doll's name and all that. He gave me some shirts, exactly the kind of shirts you think, and helped me fix the car one time. Great guy. As a postscript, the Navy guy dad, being a stupid jackass, cheats on the mom and they break up. The mom and her Polly move back to Milwaukee. Last I heard, the grandpa is married and lives the quiet life. I'm a corporate lawyer, and when I was a young associate in private practice, a partner had a client with a commercial dispute over a theater and asked me to assist. When the client came in, I immediately noticed he wasn't like most of my other clients, most of whom were business executives at larger companies and small, medium-sized business owners. This guy sat down in our Lakeview boardroom in his tight graphic t-shirt and jeans and put a pack of cigarettes down on the table. I can still smell the aggressive amount of cologne. I knew the client's last name was the same as the family that is known to run one of the Italian-based organized crime syndicates in my city, but didn't think too much about it. Then as our meeting went on and details of his dispute emerged, I started to get curious, worried. The client used terms like having money on the street and off-book loans. They had no paper to reflect the alleged arrangement for this theater he claimed to own, but claimed that ownership was now his based on a debt owed by the current owner. He just came off as quite rough around the edges. In any event, the meeting ended, and I immediately did some more online research and determined this guy was in fact the son of a reputed mob boss, who may or may not be a made guy himself. The guy had a bunch of unreasonable expectations of the relief we could get him, and over the ensuing weeks more and more came out that made me uneasy about this client. He was also just very difficult to get a hold of. In any event, before the file could come to completion, I got a new job and got the fuck out of there. Not because of this client, more because working a bigger law firm as a young associate is a terrible job. I hadn't really thought too much about that guy until right now. Thanks for jogging my memory. What makes this one unsettling is how normal it sounds on the surface. A boardroom, a legal dispute, paperwork, and underneath it, something clearly dangerous and unspoken. You can feel the tension just from the way he describes it, like everyone knew exactly who they were dealing with without ever saying it out loud. All right, let's move on to the next story. This one comes from a different Reddit thread that asks a simple but chilling question. What's been your closest real-life encounter with true crime? One person in this thread shared not just one close call, but several moments where things could have gone very wrong. A few things. Years ago, my dad was dating a girl who a gang member had attempted to murder. He beat her almost to death while her kids watched from hiding and were able to call 911. She survived, testified against the guy, and got him sent to jail. My dad and I weren't on speaking terms, so I didn't know any of this. One night, my friend leaned out my window, screamed, and grabbed me to pull me out of the room. She told me there was a man outside the window. I thought she was imagining things because we were in a really safe area, but I closed and locked the window regardless. A couple days later, my dad called to let me know to be safe because people were after him for being associated with the girl who testified and they had broken into his house. He said they knew about our family, so to be aware. She definitely saw someone out there and they probably had malicious intent. Another time, I was on a long drive to a campground with a friend in the middle of the night. We got out to a really remote area. It was so dark, I remember it felt like the headlights were doing nothing, and branches kept popping up at the last second and hitting our car. At this point, we're driving through cornfields, and we've only seen a couple of farmhouses, nothing else. Out of nowhere, a car pulls out behind us and starts speeding up to get close. We were kind of freaked out, so we started taking turns, but they would just follow us. We're speeding at this point, and they kept getting close like they were going to tap our bumper. This was in the middle of nowhere, so there was terrible cell service, and we were so far away from everything anyway. Everything was happening really fast. I actually don't think I've ever been this scared in my life, but by some stroke of luck, a car started coming from the opposite direction. So when they passed us, my friend did a huge U-turn and followed them so we weren't alone. The other car slowed for a second, then sped up again and kept moving away from us. Lastly, I was getting off work at the mall one night and waiting for a ride. The building was closed down, so I had to wait outside. There were a couple of cars in the huge parking lot, one of them with their lights on. A tall, attractive guy, who was definitely in his mid-20s, got out and started walking towards me. He said hi, really charismatically, and started asking me about myself. I was still super polite and tolerant of creepy people, so I was answering. He told me he and his high school basketball team were in town and looking for something to do, which didn't add up because none of the high school teams in my area travel overnight, and he looked like a full-grown man. He asked if I would want to bring them somewhere to get dinner and do something fun. The car is still sitting there, running with its lights on, and I can't see who's inside. I declined, and he started pulling on my arm and trying to convince me. I pulled out my phone and pretended to call someone, saying, "Oh, you're here? On the other side? Okay, I'm coming. I'm just talking to this guy by so-and-so right now." He immediately said bye and started walking away. My friend quickly pulled up and we passed by the car, which was not filled with high school boys. I later found out this is a common human trafficking scheme that is really big in my area because that location is by a major highway that makes it easy to quickly get someone in another state. I actually have so much more that I completely forgot about. I definitely have a guardian angel. This next story is unsettling not because of violence, but because the victim didn't even realize it was a crime. It's about a child who went for a normal sleepover and didn't come home for a week. The person who shared this says that even today, they struggle to call themselves a victim, but their mother and the police saw it very differently. Here's what they wrote. "I was kidnapped by my childhood best friend and her mom without realizing it. My mom suggested I could share my story to raise awareness, but the truth is that if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't have even seen it as kidnapping. If you expect a dramatic story filled with abuse and torture, I have to disappoint you. I think it's not a bad idea to share my story, and since I love Reddit, I decided to share it here. I figured that this subreddit might be the best one to do so. Using a throwaway for this, as I only want to raise awareness for this without going further into it and having my main account associated with this story. But let's get to the story. This happened when I was in elementary school. Like for most children at that age, boys and girls were somehow rivals. Me and my best friend, let's call her Lisa, fake name, however single-handedly destroyed that stereotype. She was pretty much the exact female copy of me. Our interests aligned so well that we quickly became best friends. The day it happened, I asked my mom to stay at Lisa's house for the night. She said yes, and I packed the stuff I needed. I was only prepared to stay there for one night. But one night turned into a week. When I arrived there, we had a great time playing video games, doing role play with our toys, and playing hide and seek at night. It was much fun. The next morning, I prepared for my mom to get me, but this was when Lisa's mom told me that my mom had called her and told her that I had to stay at their house for a bit longer. Being the naive young child I was, I didn't question it. Yes, I was confused, but this only made me realize that I could spend more time with Lisa, so for me it wasn't a problem. This was at a time where I didn't possess a smartphone, so it's not like my mom could have just called me. I stayed there for an entire week before I started to question why my mom hasn't got me yet. I wasn't allowed to leave the house either. I was only allowed in the house and the garden outside. When me and Lisa played outside, a neighbor saw me and called the cops. It turned out that my mom filed a missing report at the police station because I was missing for a few days. It turned out that my mom had actually tried to get me after the first night, but when she tried to, Lisa's mom told her that I already left and that apparently I told her I wanted to walk home when she offered me to give me a ride. Lisa's mom was such a sweet person that no one would have ever suspected her of doing something like this, so even my mom figured that someone had to kidnap me on my way home, so she filed the report. The police reunited me with my mom, and I was confused as hell. I had a great time there. Yes, I was a bit worried why my mom never got me, but I couldn't understand back then why Lisa's mom was arrested. This happened during summer break, and I didn't see Lisa during the summer break. And she also didn't appear at school on the first day. I have no idea what happened to her. Right now, I assume that this incident ruined their reputation so much that they moved away, and I never saw Lisa again. Like I said, it's not a typical kidnapping story. It all was so sneaky that not even I, as the alleged victim, could tell that it was one, but my mom insists that it was a kidnapping. So yeah, that's it. I still don't know if labeling myself as a victim here would be right because I just don't feel like one, but that's just me. Edit. Want to clarify something. I was a child with the attention span of a fly and tell this story based on what I remember and what my mom told me. I assume that if my mom told the police the same thing Lisa's mom told her, the police maybe didn't focus that much on Lisa's mom, and if they did, they might have just taken a witness statement of her at the door, and then it's not far-fetched, I didn't notice it, especially since I was at Lisa's room most of the time and was focused on the games we played. This is also why I didn't notice when my mom tried to get me after the first night. Just wanted to clarify this because some people call my story fake because the police wasn't investigating Lisa's house from what I could remember. A question posted on Reddit sent chills through the comments section. What's the creepiest encounter you've ever had with a complete stranger? One that still gives you chills? Here's what they shared. I feel like I remember every millisecond of this. I was jogging with my husband one day and turned a corner onto a main road in a pretty wooded rural area. It's a usually empty 2-lane road. I wasn't in the road, but the grass off to the side between the road and the woods. My husband was a distance behind me, maybe a few hundred feet. The road he was on was perpendicular to the road I turned onto. As I was turning that corner, a car approached it. White Crown Vic/Grand Marquis. Only car on the road. I was on the same side of the road he was driving, but heading the opposite direction. As the car gets closer to the corner, he slows down and is nearly breaking his neck looking at me. He's turning, I think. Good, he's paying attention and sees me by the road. Then he comes to a sudden and complete stop. He'd been slowing down once he saw me, so he didn't slam on his brakes or anything that I noticed. But he stopped fully, quickly, before he got to that corner. That's when I got chills. That's the moment that still gives me the same chills. It's like my body came to the subconscious realization before my brain even registered it. That guy just saw me and stopped suddenly in the middle of the road. That's weird, because people don't usually stop 20 feet before they turn. I live in Florida, so sometimes, yeah, they actually do LOL, and while using the opposite blinker too. But this was a guy in his 20s or 30s in the middle of nowhere, not Grandpa Lincoln White knuckling the steering wheel of his town car as he curbs it, turning into Golf World. I had like 3 seconds to realize it, freak the fuck out, and wonder what was about to happen and what I was going to do when my husband finally turned the corner around that tree line and made it to the road I was on. I was on the flat, level grass closer to the road, but his ass really cut that corner right next to the trees, probably because he was tired and looking to catch up to me. I didn't realize that's what happened until afterwards, though, because this was the moment the car literally peeled out. I had been trying not to make any kind of eye contact and keep my eyes on my focus point, but even with my headphones in, this was back in the days of wired headphones, I could hear and see in my periphery both him and the car fucking lunge. He lured it. I turned to look back at the direction he was going when he did, and that's when I saw my husband hugging those trees, rounding that corner. I was so freaked out when it happened that when I turned to look, I was looking to see the license plate number. Like I was instinctively trying to get that info. I practically didn't even have to tell my husband what happened because I stopped. And when he caught up, he was like, what was that about? I was pretty flabbergasted and out of breath, so I couldn't have told him right then. But in few words, he got the gist of it. He had turned the corner to see a car stopped in the middle of the road by me and suddenly take off. He didn't at all think he was going to get rammed by him or anything, probably because he was right along a bunch of trees, but even just the part he saw was incredibly strange. That's only what happened. Over the years, I've thought everything through to try to explain it any other way. This event has created a little web in my mind. Maybe he slowed down for road safety. It doesn't explain the complete stop. Nothing does. Maybe he slowed down when he saw me, then saw my husband through the trees somehow, and stopped completely thinking he could run into the middle of the road without hearing or seeing his car. But it's a 45-mile-per-hour road. No one would have done that because they wouldn't have slowed to a stop for a jogger they already passed. And he had to really slow down quickly after he saw me to come to a dead fucking stop as fast as he had. The little unpaved street I thought he was turning onto has a stop sign at the intersection of the main road. There's a gap between that main road and the pine forest along it, so he'd know my husband was turning towards me, not running across the road, as soon as he was visible. Same way the car would be to anyone walking or jogging along this road. If he'd seen my husband through the tree line, he'd have known he had time to drive through that intersection before my husband even got near the road. Driving safely around bikes and pedestrians means giving them space and slowing down though, not coming to a complete stop and then gunning it when you see them. No matter how I try to explain it, some other part of it doesn't make sense. My most favorable explanation of it is he was just really high, overly cautious with no logic. My other favorite explanation is that he was just having a good scare. I think a lot of people have some kind of experience like this where some creep is hitting on you or something, and your significant other comes back from wherever they are and the creep vanishes. I've even had technically way more dangerous encounters with strangers, but they don't scare me like that did. Once I was walking in a park at like 2 a.m., and a guy who seemed like he was on meth grabbed me by my arm and tried to pull me somewhere. But when something like that happens, at least for me, I am more shocked than scared. I don't instinctively pick up on any evil intent. I think what's still the most bone-chilling about this is I can't exactly pinpoint any one moment or thing and say, this is what made it scary. The whole thing was scary, even though nothing happened to me, and I feel like whatever subconsciously, instinctively told me that I was in danger is not quite known to me, and that makes it even scarier. I get chills every time I think about it. It's even worse when I recount it to someone and offer my alternate theories, and they're like, dude, I'm sorry, that guy was absolutely going to kidnap you. TLDR. Pretty sure a guy was going to try and snatch me until he saw that we weren't the only two people within 10 miles. Let's move on to the next story. It was the dead of winter near midnight, and I was struggling to empty a heavy trash can into a dumpster. I lived in a small town where everything shut down at 8, so seeing people around late at night wasn't the craziest, just a little unusual, especially with the shitty cold weather keeping folks indoors. But not me. I was a janitor for a few different businesses, and since I wasn't a morning person, I cleaned at night. The dumpster was behind the building, about 30 feet away, so I had to tread carefully through the icy parking lot as to not fall. The sidewalk that ran in front of the building was perfectly paved and salted. Remember that. So there I was, struggling to heave the garbage in the can, trying not to break my neck slipping on ice, at midnight when the town is dead, when I hear the crunching of footsteps behind me. I turn around and there is a guy coming from around the building heading towards me. He is about 15 away when I noticed him. Instantly, I just froze and stared at him. There is nothing back here except me, a dumpster, a hill the dumpster rests up against that I can't scale, and a lot of open icy areas, and I had left my pepper spray inside in my bag. Just all these facts hitting me hard in the gut. The guy sees me see him and he turns, heading back towards the sidewalk, but he seems low-key pissed. Hey! Me, still processing what reason anyone but me could have to be there that late at night. I said, "Hey," him now even more pissed. "Hey," I say back because now I'm wondering if I'm being standoffish to a dude on a walk. But at the same time, the inner alarm bells are screaming because A, he's holding a sturdy-looking pole that could be used as a weapon. B, he walked back to the paved sidewalk to leave. Why wasn't he on the sidewalk in the first place? Why make a random U-shape around a building with a shitty, icy parking lot when the sidewalk is safer, better? And C, I realized as he got closer that he was shorter than me. I don't think he realized how tall I was from a distance. Just innately I felt as he was walking away that the reason he didn't do anything was because I might put up more of a fight than he could have handled. I got my ass back inside and locked the doors. I secretly watched him walk away down the sidewalk, and when he was out of sight, I checked out his footpath in the snow. That's when I saw prints next to one of the windows. Instant gut sink. I think he had noticed the lights on in the building and investigated. He probably watched me clean inside for God knows how long before deciding to follow me to the dumpster. It really scared me. I can't lie. Even though nothing technically happened, I didn't feel safe cleaning at night anymore, so I started cleaning in the mornings. This is not the end of the story. It was years later when I was checking out the local bulletin board when I saw that guy's fucking face on a wanted danger poster. He had murdered 2 elderly people, not his grandparents, they were strangers, decapitating them but leaving their dogs alive. No real motive other than opportunity, which I think back to running into him next to that dumpster and get really fucking nervous, as there was no goddamn way anyone was coming to help. I wonder if I was a short woman, would I be dead right now? Final kicker, he hasn't been caught. That's right, he's still on the loose somewhere. I think he's got friends, family hiding him somewhere. Don't know how he's managing to survive otherwise. Lots of wannabe badasses repeat the slogan, shoot, shovel, and shut up here, and it doesn't bother them that the people he killed were elderly strangers. But that's just my theory. He could be squatting in someone's second home who had a well-stocked pantry. Who knows? But yeah, here's to not dying at a minimum wage job's dumpster. All right, let's move on. I went on a date with a girl in Lakeland, Florida, who worked for Florida Orthopedic Institute. She was a surgeon's assistant. We met at a restaurant in Lakeland, and she showed up completely drunk. During dinner, she kept asking me about any sports-related injuries I had. I told I had an old damaged rotator cuff from 20-plus years ago, and she was basically touching me all over, telling me how much she'd love to cut me open, snip the damaged tendon, and tack it back in place. I was horrified, and she seemed completely fine with telling me how much she'd love to watch me be put under and cutting my shoulder up. Basically, it seemed like it turned her on, the idea of watching me get cut open. She ordered a bottle of wine and drank almost the entire bottle of wine by herself. I had 1 glass, she had the other 4, and finished the bottle. At the end of dinner, she wanted to go walk around a couple street bars that were near the restaurant. She seemed to know people everywhere, and I was embarrassed to be with her. She was so drunk, acting so strange about how much she wants to have me cut open, insisting on it, telling me to make an appointment, being extremely pushy about it. Anyways, I realized there was no way for her to drive home, and she was practically passing out on me. I offered to drive her home in her car and Uber back to the restaurant. We had met during the week, so I figured she'd need her car to get to work. I drove her in her car back to her apartment, walked her up to her apartment, basically opened the door for her, locked the bottom lock, tossed her keys inside on the floor, and shut the door. As I'm walking back to the apartment parking lot, I realized my phone was at critical less than 5%. This was back in 2017/2018, and Uber/Lyft hadn't really taken off just yet. In a rural area like Lakeland, I opened up the app and realized that there was 0 drivers anywhere in Lakeland on a Wednesday at midnight. Nothing, 0 cars, 0, and I had no idea where I was even at. I'm basically standing on the side of some dark road in Lakeland as my cell phone is about to die. Finally, a car pops up about 20 minutes away, and I immediately message the driver that I have a $40 cash tip if he doesn't cancel the ride. I tell him my cell phone is about to die and that I drove a drunk person home. He texts back that he won't cancel the ride. My cell phone completely dies. It felt like an absolute eternity, but he finally arrives and picks me up and takes me back to my car. The next afternoon, she texts me asking what happened. I told her the story. She starts insisting that she remembers her and I having sex. I told her numerous times that we 100% did not have sex. She kept saying that she dreamed we had sex and that she thinks we had sex. I sent her a screenshot, me calling for the Uber ride, insisting that we didn't have sex 100%. One of the creepiest dates I ever went on, one of the creepiest people I ever met. This next story comes from a Reddit thread that asked a deeply unsettling question. Redditors with a murderer in the family, what's your story? And one response stood out for how raw and heartbreaking it was. Just a heads up, this story involves family violence and murder. This is my first time commenting on Reddit. I have a story to share. I have only ever told my boyfriend this. My older brother murdered my father. He was 17 at the time. He snapped one day and apparently killed him with a knife and a hammer. I feel really sad when I imagine what my dad's last few moments were like. I think he probably felt a deep betrayal and an overwhelming sadness that his own son did this to him. I wonder if he was able to come to terms with what was happening before he passed. I know he must have suffered, but I hope at least he wasn't angry up to the point of his death, that he could feel some peace. But in reality, he probably died in agony and despair from being stabbed over and over, watching his life literally drain out of him. Then my brother dismembered him and put his body in garbage bags and dumped him in the woods. Just imagine that. A person you know, no longer a person but slabs of meat. A month went by before we started getting considered calls. I lived in a separate home with my mom because my parents were separated at the time. My mom called their house to see where my dad was, and at that point my brother confessed. My mom called the police, and we were all brought in to the police station. I was 16. While waiting for our police interviews, I wasn't allowed to speak to my other younger brother or my mom. We were separated so we wouldn't collaborate. My older brother confessed and ended up pleading guilty to murder. I think first degree, but maybe second. Went to juvie for a few years, then switched to adult jail. He was released after 6 years in prison. I think the legal system is pretty interesting. You can kill a human being and serve 6 years in trade for saving the tax dollar the money of a trial. He went back to jail a while later for animal cruelty. I don't know if he's in or out right now. I don't really want to. Haven't spoken to him for 8 years now. My father was not really a good person either. He was abusive to my mom, and I felt scared around him. The last time I saw him, he threatened my mom in front of me. At the same time, he loved me, and I have some good memories with him. It's complicated. I also always felt scared of my older brother. I'd hide under my pillow when he lived in my house because I was scared he'd try something with me in the middle of the night. The murder happened in the summer before I entered 11th grade. It was surreal. The day I learned that my dad I came home from a weekend cabin trip with a boy I kind of liked. I remember I was wearing my favorite pair of socks when I was for the first time with said boy at the cabin, and I was still wearing them when I heard my dad was. It was a strange juxtaposition, being a normal teenager on one hand and then this massive culmination of violence on the other. It certainly changed my life. Okay, that was genuinely disturbing. All right, let's take a moment and move to the next story. My father suffered from bipolar, but did not like the psychiatric advice he was given, so did not take medication. To be fair, on the one hand, a psychiatrist labeled him as a misogynist, which is not agreeable. Yet on the other, he clearly hated all the women I know of in his life, taking both verbal and physical acts as evidence. Instead, he self-medicated with booze and cannabis. When he was apocalyptically drunk, which was most nights, he would veer between making threats against my mom, his children, or himself. Obviously, my mom stopped sleeping in the same room as him. The fact I have 3 younger siblings is down to him being a rapist, as this kind of behavior is pretty tiresome. He would therefore wake her up from sleeping on the living room sofa with a belt around his neck, shouting about what she was doing to him. I don't think my father was capable of realizing that he was doing this to himself. One of my first memories is of him strangling my mother through the smashed glass of the porch door. My last memory of talking to him is when he phoned from prison. After years of threatening to kill someone or anyone, he did kill his first son, my half-brother, from his first and only marriage. We kicked my father out when I was 18, and he lived in a very cheap and unpleasant student house owned by the shop owner who'd been selling him Carlsberg Special Brew for all those years. Robert, his first son, went to live with him in order to get back into education, interestingly to train as a nurse like my own mother. My father carried a knife around because he felt paranoid. Bipolar blends into schizophrenia. They can share similar genetic causes and certainly similar symptoms, and, during an argument about politics, stabbed his son in the heart. That was almost 2 decades ago. I've had to work through a lot of survivor guilt. Recently, my father died, and his family managed to find my family to tell us that it's our fault all this happened. That's just the kind of shit you have to believe to feel blameless when you have a son, brother who hates you and wants to destroy himself, and you are powerless to help, because even admitting there is a problem, after a string of arrests for domestic violence, an imploded marriage, being imprisoned for the manslaughter of your own son, is not something you can take on board. Overall, I've learned that when someone is mentally ill, displays criminal behavior, threatens to lash out and murder people, and carries a deadly weapon around, it might be best to take them seriously. It is also important to not blame the victim, even if it is convenient, because convenience is not more important than human beings. This next story comes from a serious Reddit thread asking, "What dark family secret were you let in on once you were old enough?" Let's go through a few of the responses. My aunt was a real piece of work. To backtrack a moment, this side of my family isn't biological. Technically, my dad is my stepdad, but he raised me from toddlerhood, and he's my dad, pure and simple. All of his family treated me as one of their own, except my aunt. She would always tell my grandparents that she just couldn't understand how they could love me because I wasn't blood family. I have no idea why she didn't want her son back. It was a familial kidnapping, non-custodial father. When my cousin was returned, she ditched him with my grandparents and got back together with her other half. When I was a teenager, my grandma called my dad crying. My aunt was doing some digging and discovered she and my dad were adopted. I'm not defending this, but it was the 1950s and in another country. Not disclosing an adoption wasn't unusual at the time. My aunt threatened to tell my dad, so my grandma called and said they were adopted. My dad's reaction was literally, "So?" My aunt never spoke to my grandparents again, and my cousin turned out exactly like her. And so all those years of not liking me because I'm not blood backfired, because she isn't blood either. I'm glad that has never mattered to me. All right, let's move on to the next story. My parents took me to Disneyland for my 7th birthday. I recall landing, going to the park, having a great first day or two. Then my parents had to step out and take a bunch of phone calls. They sounded very stressed. They kept telling me nothing happened and everything was okay. Eventually we flew home, and surprise. Took an extra couple days to go to a big water park away from home. I fondly remembered this birthday and eventually forgot about any of the weirdness. Maybe 10 years later, my parents finally told me what happened. My uncle, my dad's brother, tried to kill himself on my 7th birthday. He shot himself in the stomach with a rifle. He was poor, addicted to drugs, no work, etc. He felt depressed. My dad had the life he always wanted, so tried to kill himself. He ended up living. My parents took me to the water park so that we didn't have to come home to him leaving the hospital. By not telling me, my parents let me keep my birthday as my day, not the day Uncle tried to die. Knowing how a 7-year-old's brain works, I probably would have thought I had something to do with it. That was intense. Let's continue. My parents had 2 kids before I was born. My mother drowned them in a bathtub during a psychotic episode. Somehow, despite this and a prior history of mental illness, she got released and had me a couple years later. They had another child just before I turned 2, but I never laid eyes on her. Neither of them ever fessed up, though. I only found out about their existence after an aunt died and left me her personal effects. I found birth announcements for these other kids in her mementos. I always thought she meant for me to find them. When I asked my parents, they refused to discuss anything related to these kids. A few years later, I went back to my hometown and looked up that date in the newspaper morgue. The friend who went with me was floored. I wasn't, really. I'd grown up in fear for my life from her rages. I broke off contact with them as soon as I could, not just because of this, though it didn't help. I had a slew of my own traumas growing up. It was a huge mistake to let them try to raise another child. One person shared their family's dark history in a list, and every point somehow gets worse. 1. My grandfather killed his own son by throwing him on the floor because he was crying. He was just a couple months old. 2. My uncle tried to rob a bank and ran away by foot. He later on got married and his wife ended up committing suicide. At the time, the police thought that my uncle killed her since he had a criminal past, but he didn't. He was at work and there were witnesses. 3. I have multiple half-siblings. My dad is unfaithful. 4. My grandfather burnt the house down with his wife and children inside with the intention of them dying. My grandmother ran away with her 7 or 8 children, I don't recall, and she asked a priest that she worked for, I think she cleaned his house, to give her a space to stay. He ended up giving her a home that an old lady left for the church, and if I'm not mistaken, she was paying it little by little. 5. My aunt's neighbor, who I went to the beach with when I was little, apparently killed his own wife abroad. 6. There was a rumor that my uncle's kids weren't his. That's not just a dark family secret. That's generations of trauma. That's a lot to take in. Stories like this show how deeply violence and secrecy can run in families. Here's the next one. My mother grew up in the American South. Her brother died in his early 20s, and she always told me it was a freak accident. A bullet came through the window, killing him. They lived in a rural area, so I never questioned it. One year, I inherited an old Korean War officer's sword after my grandpa passed. My mom freaked out and told me that it was too dangerous to keep and that we should sell it or get a safe to lock it up in. I thought it was weird, so I asked my dad, and he got this sad look on his face. Turns out my mom's brother was brutally murdered with a similar sword in the 80s. He had gotten involved with some drug dealers, and they thought he had snitched about one of their big deals that got busted. No idea why they decided to use a sword, but it was pretty fucked up to hear about. My mom had to ID the body. I found this out when I was 16, but she never directly acknowledged it until years later. My mom said he was just trying to make some extra cash by introducing people who partied to the dealers. I'm about his age now, and I can see how he just thought he was making a quick buck, never thinking something like that would get him killed. Dude, here's a family story I refer to as the accident. For years, my older sister's bio dad died in an accident when she was 8. She didn't find out until she was a teenager that it wasn't a car accident. It was a painted the ceiling with his brain accident. Anyway, fast forward 30-some years, and my sister deals with a fuckload of mental issues and is constantly treating her children poorly. It's Easter Sunday, and our younger sister is introducing her boyfriend to our family, and it's his first meal with us. Think Motor Norman Rockwell style all-out meal, but with a bunch of kids and family. But my older sister won't stop yelling at her kids. My dad, who has been her only active father, finally snaps and tells her to knock it off. She, a 40-something-year-old woman, pulls the "you're not my dad" line like a shitty teenager. That man goes from calm to red, stood up, veins bulging from his head, and absolutely screams, "Yeah? Your fucking child molester dad blew his fucking head off. He never had to deal with your bullshit." And that's how everyone in our family found out what the accident really was and why it happened. Why the neighbors moved. Trigger warning for violent crime. I was pretty young when this happened, so the details won't be perfect, but the story is otherwise true. I grew up in a coastal town, and we had some neighbors whom I really liked. My parents were friends with them, their kids were roughly my age. Wonderful, we played together all the time. One day they very suddenly moved. I was a bit confused, as there had been no clue that they were going. I remember some police cars and the moving vans weeks later, but that was it. My mother told me that the kid's grandmother had become very ill. The cops came to tell the family, and they left emergently to care for her and never came back. I was only about 5. Seemed legit. Many years later, as an adult, and long since moved away from that area, my parents and I were reminiscing over our old home. I mentioned that I wondered what ever happened to them. That's when my mom told me the truth. The parents had gone out that night on a date and left the kids with a 14-year-old babysitter. When they returned home, they found the sitter murdered. Someone had broken into the home and essayed then killed the sitter. My mom stated the cops think the sitter pretended to be the only one home to protect the kids. When the parents got home, they checked the kids were safe and set them back to sleep. The police obviously immediately came. Once the kids were hard asleep, the parents picked them up, put blankets over their heads, asked the cops to be silent as they walked them out, and took them out of the house. They gave the kids the same story my parents told me. Grandma was sick and they were going to live with her. Grandma dutifully played along with the ruse for several weeks until the parents could find a new home to live in. The kids were kept unaware of what had happened, just mere feet from them, as they didn't want the kids to be forever terrified of it happening again. Not sure if the kids ever eventually figured out the truth of that one. What happened is terrifying, but I understand why the parents did everything they could to protect their children. Here's the next one. Growing up, I always knew my parents had marital issues, constant fighting, a couple times Dad disappeared for a few days living in his car, issues with drinking, but they stayed together, and when I asked why didn't they divorce, they always said they loved each other too much, and in the past few years, things seem to have gotten better. My parents, in fact, are now so comfortable in their relationship that they make jokes about all the awful stuff they've done to each other in front of me. What I've managed to put together is, my parents met when they were 14, and my mother was dating an 18-year-old, and my dad would relentlessly ask her out until she eventually dumped her boyfriend for my dad. My mother went on to university after college, we're UK, whereas my dad dropped out of college and went straight into work while constantly drinking and partying. It was at one of these parties, while my mom was studying, that he cheated on my mom with someone from their old secondary school, so she dumps him. Barely a year later, my dad realizes he doesn't know how to do anything for himself. No one else wants him, and he goes crawling back to my mom. She agrees to take him back, but only if he marries her, not immediately, but eventually, she said. He agrees. And a short year after that, age 22 now, she's already pressuring him to propose. He fumbles it, frankly. We're in Paris, but forgot the ring, and proposed back in the hotel room after they'd visited the Eiffel Tower that day, which was her dream proposal, but she says yes. A month after they're married, Mom pressures him into having a child that he doesn't want, and 9 months later I was born. They soon realize how hard having a child is, and basically pawn me off on my grandparents for the rest of my childhood. After me, there were 2 more accidental babies, and each time my dad threatened to leave her if she didn't abort them. She managed to convince him to stay, while keeping my siblings by promising he wouldn't have to raise them. He didn't, but neither did she. Frankly, I did. And that is only what happened before, shortly after I was born. If I carried on into my childhood, we'd be here for years. What they sold to me as the perfect love story, been together since they were 14, proposed in Paris, soon married and had children because of pure love, is in fact a bunch of skewered half-truths from a horrible, twisted love map of my mother's manipulation and my father disappointing her time and time again. Found this out after my grandfather died. Growing up, every older guy in the neighborhood would say how tough he was. I mean, he was the most intimidating man I'd ever met. You would jump if he sneezed. I'm not even exaggerating. But I'd never seen him actually fight. But everyone, and I mean everyone, women and men, would say he never lost a fight and usually never had to throw more than one punch to knock someone out. Simply put, he was a bad motherfucker. But growing up, he would always preach to me and my cousins to never fight if you could help it. Just walk away. If they're insulting you, just walk away. It's only words, sticks and stones and all that. He'd drill it into our heads that you never fight unless you have to, and never under any circumstances do you throw the first punch. Ever. I was kind of confused. Every older person in our neighborhood would tell me how nobody fucked with Blackie because of how many people he knocked out. And he would always tell us not to fight. Turns out when he was in his 20s, he got into a fight with someone. Apparently the guy kept insulting him and wouldn't leave him alone. Finally he had enough and cracked the guy, knocked him out with one punch. Problem is, when he landed, he hit his head on a step. It was lights out for good. Killed him with one punch. I had never heard this story and confused about how he didn't get locked up. Turns out he did. Got like 15 to 20 years or something like that. Then World War II happened. When I was a kid, I'd always ask my mom how my grandfather entered the war. Was he drafted or volunteered? She'd say, oh, it was like the movie The Dirty Dozen, which I had never seen or had any interest in when I was young, so I had no idea what that meant. Turns out the Army made him a deal. Go to the front lines in Japan. If you live well, expunge your record. If not, oh well, he went. Things made a lot more sense after that. This next one is about a family secret that completely rewrote someone's understanding of their own past. My grandma had an affair with a Catholic priest while she was married, and then left her high school sweetheart who she had 5 children with. Then she ended up living with said priest, and her kids had to lie and refer to him as an uncle when people asked them about their living situation. I always thought it was true love. I found and kept letters and notes they wrote each other when he was overseas with the military, and it seemed so genuine, and I'd always heard so many nice stories, and I suppose it could have been true love. I was raised to believe that my biological grandfather, my dad's real dad, was a monster. I had been under the impression he left my grandma and abandoned his 5 children. My one aunt died in a drunk driving accident, and he couldn't be bothered to show up. I never met him my entire childhood. I was literally encouraged to actively hate him. They said he remarried and basically started a new family and was controlled by his wife. The priest essentially raised my dad and aunts and uncles, and they have always revered him. He died before I was old enough to have any memories of him, but I'd always looked at him with a positive light. He'd taken my grandma and a couple of the kids to Hawaii, bought my grandma a Suburban, and the house was in his name. My grandma was even left his military benefits, still unclear on how this was finagled. He paid for the kids' colleges. He had an incredible life. He had pictures with Bob Hope and other celebrities, got to travel a ton of places, etc. One day I was curious if he had any relatives alive and if they had ever known about this salacious relationship. Then I Googled him, and it changed my life forever. He, posthumously, was accused in a lawsuit with a large group of priests of wrongdoing over an extended period of time. You can guess the nature of the lawsuit. It was on several law websites, and I found the lawsuit papers. Surely enough, his name was mentioned. Unease began to ensue. I did more digging and eventually found a 16-page document. This document was specific to him and included a police report and internal Catholic Church investigations into his transgressions, among other things. Early into his priesthood, he was accused of harboring a runaway 14-year-old girl. He had explanations for everything. OFC. Reading the police report was absolutely devastating BC. It seemed like the police did no due diligence, and nothing came of the report. Then there were pages worth of internal Catholic Church investigations in which I learned he would have young, distastefully dressed girls hanging out in his rectory and was drinking and showing up to events and/or not showing up at all. He once said he had been called by the military and was away from the church, except he lied and had been drinking, gambling, and philandering with women. Members of the church and other priests wrote anonymous letters about his conduct and asked for his removal. There were bouts of rehab and probation, but he was moved to another church. Some of the same antics occurred. You get the picture. This man my family had told me to revere as a literal godsend was in fact nothing of the sort. Then I found a summary of all his transgression over the years that led to his retirement. This is when I found out when he took my grandma, dad, and his 2 siblings to get the Suburban, he physically assaulted my grandma and kicked my dad and his siblings. I cross-referenced all of this information with birth years, where they grew up and lived, and the fact my uncle still has the Suburban. I was by myself when I found all of this out, and I've asked my dad if he's ever looked him up, and he said yes. So he knows of the lawsuit, but I haven't asked if he dug as far as I did to find this 16-page document. I don't know how to approach this, or if it's even worth bringing up to him. I'm curious how much he knows and if he remembers being assaulted. I'm also extremely disturbed if they knew of his past and chose to lie to me about this man. If they didn't, then my heart breaks for what they endured with years of lies, abuse, and the hurt they felt. It also makes me question my grandmother and her choices and everything she subjected her children to. My dad and aunt reconnected with my biological grandfather a few years ago. He eventually came to visit us from across the country. I was in my mid-20s meeting my biological grandfather. I am truly apathetic to him and forming a relationship with him. My mom's mom had 2 husbands, and those were my grandpas. My grandpas and grandmas have all passed now, so I've mourned losing all of my grandparents. I do not feel this man is my grandfather and have been at peace with this for a very long time. However, it's made me realize my grandma abandoned him. He was the one who came to the church with the suspicion she was having an affair with the priest. At that, my heart breaks for him. The priest also did my aunt's funeral, so while some piece of me feels I can't forgive him for not going to his own daughter's funeral, I also can't imagine having to face a priest who my wife ran off with. I'm so torn that my family pitted me against this man that is my biological grandfather, when this priest was clearly a fraud and lacked human decency and morals. It is also clear that my grandma made extremely questionable decisions and, with other unrelated reasons, had tarnished my vision of her. Needless to say, one of my wild facts has changed significantly from my grandma fell in love with a priest, truly so conflicting and heartbreaking. Sometimes the scariest moments aren't loud or obvious, they're quiet, a feeling you can't explain, but can't ignore either. On Reddit, someone once asked a simple but terrifying question. When was the moment your gut told you something's not right, and it ended up saving you? Let's read the replies. I normally go to the club with my husband. He was out of town, but I had friends that said they'd be out. My club has always been a very safe club, but the area it's in has had its ups and downs. Because drinking in a bunch of clubs in a small area comes with drunks and ne'er-do-wells of all kinds. Since I was alone, I chose my parking spot carefully. The usual spot was a few blocks off, and that was farther than I was comfortable. The paid parking lot was open, but they crammed so many cars in that getting in and out could be difficult, and that just made me uncomfortable for some reason. I chose street parking 2 blocks down. The block itself was dark, but the next block up was very brightly lit thanks to a big-name hotel. Basically, I had a semi-dark block, a very well-lit block, with the paid parking lot and parking lot attendant across from it. And then I was at my club. Straight shot. My car and the club was in eyesight of each other if one stood at the corner and leaned over enough. The moment I got into the club, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. None of my friends showed up, so I'm alone. Normally this isn't an issue, but the vibe was seriously off. Without going into too long of a story with details, some dude kept trying to buy me a drink that I kept turning down, partly because I don't accept drinks from strangers, and partly because this dude didn't seem to be flirting with me, and so I couldn't understand why he was so insistent on getting me a drink. I lied and said I was on medication, but he kept insisting, so I agreed to a water, because it comes in a sealed water bottle. Dude comes back with the type of glass that mixed drinks usually come in. The moment he gives it to me, he leaves, and I don't see him again for the rest of the night. The water went straight down the bathroom sink, and I started looking for someone to walk me out because my alarm bells are going off. Partially due to my own impatience to get myself gone, and partially because the one person I knew had also disappeared, I ended up just leaving without having someone walk me. 2 blocks, straight line, mostly brightly lit. What could happen? Once again, the moment I crossed the street and was walking that first block, this voice in my head says, you fucked up, get your keys out and get ready. I'm having a full-on conversation with this inner instinct, voice, what have you, trying to figure out why I'm freaked out. I thought about heading back to the club, and that voice said, nope, it's too late. Don't run, or they'll know you know. Just keep your eyes forward and be ready to jump in your car. Don't stop for anything. I'm looking to make eye contact with the parking lot attendant, but he's not there, so I have no witnesses to at least watch me get to my car. Now, I'm suddenly terrified of that half a block of unlit road that I'm parked on. I almost froze at the corner, but that voice said, go, hurry, now. Crossing that road into darkness felt like jumping into the unknown. I'm freaking out and I have no idea why, but now I'm picking up my pace and hoping I don't drop my keys because my hands are shaking so badly. And also, I've had nightmares like this before. For no reason. There wasn't a single thing that gave me reason to feel this panicked until I get to my car door. As soon as I get my door open, another car pulls up from behind me and slid into the spot directly behind mine. This is weird because it's street parking, so 1, they parked sloppy with the ass end half in the street. 2, they're parked facing the wrong direction. 3, holy shit, I don't think they're meaning to actually park. I hit the door locks and start to back up. In my review mirror, I see the torso of some guy jump out and head toward my passenger door. I'm already pulling out of the parking spot, but I could see his tensed-up arm and closed fist just outside my passenger window. I was terrified that I hadn't given myself enough room to pull out and would have to reverse again. Had he parked any closer, I wouldn't have had enough room. At that point, I was fully committed to hitting the car in front of me if I had to, because that voice was still screaming, "Don't stop, go, go, go." And then I was gone. And that voice was gone. And I'm speeding down the highway in the most deafening silence I've ever experienced as I tried to understand what just happened. It took me a bit to put the pieces together, but I think Drink Dude was spiking drinks and Car Dude was pickup. The more I think about it, the more I get the feeling that it was a trafficking operation. If I had been 2 seconds slower for any reason, I can only imagine how that night would have ended. That is absolutely terrifying. Nothing actually happened, and that's the scariest part. If she had ignored that feeling for even a few seconds, this story would have ended very differently. That wasn't paranoia, that was instinct. Let's read the next one. A few years ago, when I was 19 and studying abroad in Europe, and my friend and I decided to go to Turkey. It was our first time really traveling on our own without a group, and we decided to walk around the square outside of the Blue Mosque. We felt very safe during the day and decided to see the city at night with the lights. As we were in the square, we were hounded by typical store owners trying to sell us something. Finally, most went away, and as we were going back to our hotel, a younger guy approached us. He said he had a shop on the corner, which he pointed to with lots of souvenirs, including carpets. I grew up with a lot of handmade, woven carpets from my parents' travels to the Middle East and Asia. I decided it would be a nice gift, so we follow him. When we get to what we thought was his shop, we stopped. We started to walk in, and he said, "Not that one, the one around the corner." We poke our head around and sure enough see a store, only selling carpets. I started to get a slightly strange feeling, but nothing overwhelming, so we followed him as we could see the store. When we walked in, about 13 to 15 other men were in the shop. They were pointing out carpets and showing us around, and I started to get really uncomfortable. My friend seemed completely at ease, so we followed the group around the bend to the other part of the store. In Turkey, it is common to be offered tea, so that part is not particularly odd. But the men, who were now circling us, were insistent that we have tea with them in the basement. I kept saying no, but they were leading us towards steps, completely surround us. We got to the steps, and my friend started walking down. My body began to sweat. My heart went crazy, and I never had such an overwhelming fear. I kept trying to think of how we could overpower these men. I grabbed my phone, stopped in my tracks, and gasped. "Friend's name, we need to go right now." My mom just texted me asking why we aren't back at the hotel yet, 'cause the map shows we're at this store. We're supposed to FaceTime with them in 10 minutes. The men kind of look around and tell us we can have tea in less than that amount of time. I keep insisting that my parents are freaking out because they can tell we're in the carpet store and not the hotel, and that they will likely contact the embassy if we don't get going. They continued blocking the staircase. I told them that we would come for tea in the morning, as I still really wanted a carpet, and that we needed to get out of the store and back to FaceTime. It took a little persuading, but they eventually opened a path for us to go to the door. One of them followed us back to the square, insisting that we return, come back and see them. Of course we didn't. I have no idea if they were completely harmless or not, but I had never had such an overwhelming feeling. They easily could have drugged us, placed us in carpets, and taken us out. My parents didn't actually have our location as my phone was on airplane mode, so who actually knows? On the other hand, I might have been paranoid, but it wasn't a situation I ever wanted to be in again. Once we were back at the hotel, she told me she was really scared too, but that she thought I was fine, so she went with it. That's where we'll end today's video. If you made it this far, thank you for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed these stories. If you have a moment, let me know in the comments what you thought, or if you've ever experienced something like this yourself, feel free to share your story below. And if you enjoyed this kind of content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It genuinely motivates me to keep researching and bringing you the next one. Until next time, take care and trust your instincts.